Today, I want to talk about a lure that it seems like a lot of anglers have fallen asleep on, and that is a buzzbait. Now, obviously, I don't mean literally, but it seems like the buzzbait has really gone on the back burner when it comes to picking out a fishing lure. And with the invention and creation of so many different lures like the plopper and chatterbaits and all these different square bills, I can kind of see why a lot of guys have kind of more or less forgotten about the buzzbait. But I once heard Denny Brower, a guy who has won more BASS tournaments than most in his career, say that the buzzbait was the jig of topwater baits. And basically what he was saying is, like a jig, if you fish a buzzbait for a good portion of the day, you're going to catch some bigger than average bass on a buzzbait. So today I want to give you 5 tips that will really help you to catch more on the buzzbait. So stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. Now, the buzzbait has been around for a long time. I mean, a lot of anglers have used this bait at some point in their life, but one of the biggest things that I don't hear a lot of anglers talk about is the speed at which you fish a buzzbait. And this is something that I find to be extremely important. There are days on the water where changing up your speed or finding the certain speed that the bass like will really help you to get a lot more bites on a buzzbait. And I've seen this on kind of both ends of the spectrum. For example, there are times where I like to fish a buzzbait in really cold water temps that are in the 50-degree range. And anytime that I'm fishing this bait in cold water, I really like to slow this bait down. And a lot of times, in order to slow a bait down, I'm going to use a little bit bigger blade on my buzzbait, and I like to add not only a skirt but some sort of soft plastic like a buzz toad or horny toad style bait to my buzzbait. That really helps me to be able to slow that buzzbait down and really creep it across the top of the water in cold water, and that helps me to get a lot more bites in cold water. Now, if I am fishing in warm water or fishing it during the summer months, a lot of times I like to rip this bait, really bring it fast across the surface of the water, because what you see a lot in the summer months is bass have been caught. They have seen every lure. So if you can create a reaction strike, if you can really rip that bait across a piece of wood or down a riprap bank, those fish really have to decide right then and there if they're going to bite that bait. And sometimes this is a great way to catch some really big fish in the middle of summer, is just ripping this bait down the bank. Now, this actually brings me to tip number 2, which is very important, and this is something you just don't see a lot of guys do, and that is make sure you pop a buzzbait. Okay, anytime you are fishing it, whether it is in cold water or in warm water, no matter when, every time I make a cast, I'm going to pop this bait probably 2 or 3 times during my cast. And what I mean by popping it is I'm gonna cast this bait out, and I'm not just gonna sit there and reel it at the same pace. Every now and then, I'm just gonna pop my reel handle, or I can pop my rod up like that, and it basically just makes that bait go forward and just kind of spit a little bit. And I have seen so many times that will be the difference between you catching fish and not, is by popping that bait. I saw this really clearly at Lake Norman several years ago. The only way that a fish would hit a top water like a buzzbait is if you were reeling that bait and all of a sudden you hit the reel handle, you pop that bait up just a little bit, and that is when the fish would commit to the bait. It was like they were tracking it, they were following it, but as soon as you popped it, they would commit to it. They would come up there and they would snatch it. So just make sure that anytime you are fishing this bait, you pop that rod, pop that bait from time to time. Now, tip number 3 is make sure that you have the right equipment for a buzzbait. A buzzbait is a little bit different when it comes to a top water bait. A lot of top water baits that we know about, spooks, poppers, ploppers, these are all baits that have treble hooks on them. And obviously a buzzbait just has a single hook. So you're not going to use your traditional top water equipment with a buzzbait. And as a matter of fact, you can use straight fluorocarbon line with a buzzbait if you really want to. This is something that I did for for a long time. A lot of guys think, hey, I can't use fluorocarbon with topwater baits because it drags that lure down. Well, with a buzzbait, you are constantly reeling this bait. There's no way a fluorocarbon even impacts it. And I did this for a long time. I would use straight fluorocarbon 20-pound test, and I used a 7-foot 2-inch heavy power rod, fast action, and that was a great buzzbait rod. I could place that bait anywhere. I could get fish out of heavy cover. Now though, I actually use braided line, and I really have enjoyed fishing this bait a lot more with braid. The biggest thing that you want to do if you are fishing braided line, like this is 30-pound braid, is make sure that you have a little bit more limber of a rod. This rod here, this is actually a rod that's made by Arc, and it's made for a buzzbait. It's called the Buzz Burner rod. It's a 7-foot 1-inch rod. It's a fast action rod, but it's a little bit more of a moderate fast in my opinion. This rod actually bends a little bit further down the blank than most fast action rods, but that is perfect for fishing a buzzbait with braided line. So you can fish a buzzbait on fluoro, you can fish it on braid. Just make sure if you fish it on braid like I do, you have that little bit more of a limber rod. It really helps with your hook sets, with hooking up with fish, with putting them in the boat. I lose very few fish with a buzzbait once I hook up. Now, tip number 4 when it comes to fishing a buzzbait is keep your lure color simple. This is something that I really don't mess with a whole lot. I think sometimes a lot of guys just put too much of an emphasis on the color of their lure. For me, there's 3 main color of plastics that I'm gonna use on my buzzbait. And about 90% of the time these days, I'm using a buzzbait that looks just like this with a horny toad on it, just like this. I'm gonna use black, I'm gonna use white, and then I'm gonna use either like a green pumpkin or a watermelon. So anytime I'm fishing in muddy water or in really dark conditions, that is when I use the black. So I use the black actually a lot. Now, anytime I am fishing around bass that I know are eating shad, I'm going to use a white color, right? Because most shad in the water are white. Now, anytime I am fishing around bluegill eating bass, I'm gonna use that either green pumpkin or watermelon color. So I keep colors really simple. Now, when it comes to the color of the blade that you are using, I think that this is something, again, a lot of guys just put too much of an emphasis on. If I'm fishing in muddy or really off-color water, I do not personally think the color of the blade matters at all. I think that the blade simply is the attractant. It is what makes the noise, which the bass then look up and try to find. In muddy water though, they're not really seeing a whole lot. They're not even going to really see a lot of flash from that blade at all. Now, if I am fishing really clear water, that is when I will mess around a little bit with the blade color. I still don't always think that it matters that much, if I'm being 100% honest with you. But if I'm fishing a white horny toad in clear water, that's usually when I go with kind of the silver blade, like the one that I have here. If I am fishing around bluegill eaters and I'm using that green pumpkin, that's when I actually like that little bit of gold on it, because bluegill have a little bit of gold and oranges on their throat. That's really the only reason, but honestly, I do not think it matters most of the time. Now, the 5th tip when it comes to buzzbait fishing actually has nothing to do at all with a buzzbait. When you fish a buzzbait, no matter what you do at times, you could have the right color, you could use a trailer hook, you could use a toad. You're gonna have days on the water where you have certain fish that just miss that buzzbait. They may hit this bait with a closed mouth, and if they're doing that, you're not gonna hook up with them. But what you can do is have some sort of follow-up bait. This is extremely important. It's something you've probably heard before, but even though you've heard it, I feel like a lot of guys still don't carry it and still don't have this bait ready to go. Now, when it comes to a follow-up bait, a wacky rig is probably number 1 to me. I'm going to match the color of my wacky rig to the color of the buzzbait that I'm using. So if I'm using a black toad on a buzzbait, I'm going to use a black wacky worm. If I'm using a green pumpkin toad, green pumpkin. If I'm using a white. And what I want the bass to think is that they killed whatever they hit. So if you have a bass come up there and they hit a buzzbait really hard, but they miss it, what I do is I get that bait in as quick as I can, pick up my wacky rig and fire it exactly where they hit that bait, and I just let that bait fall. I want the bass to think that whatever they heard, they killed it, and now they can go over there and eat it. And you would be surprised. You're not gonna get every single fish, but you would be surprised at how many fish that you get on that follow-up bait. And sometimes, you know, for me, if you fish a lot of tournaments like me, it can mean a really big difference in your day. Now, speaking of the Wacky Rig is one of the best fish catching baits that there are on the market. And I made a full video right here all about Wacky Rigs. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy this one as well. Please comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.